All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be volume 2 to an initial entry in this series that I made last December, a video entitled Black Woman Explains Liberal Black Women. And the reason why I felt like titling that video was very important in the way that I entitled it, and the reason why I felt like utilizing this sister here and many of the statements that she makes in regards to addressing the phenomenon that plagues the modern liberal black woman is so relevant is because it's best to get information like this from a member of that demographic so that people don't try to perpetuate this nonsense about the gender war, about the so-called black man being against the black woman. And I say this all the time on my channel. This is not a hate the black woman channel. This is not a black man versus black woman channel. Those channels are all over YouTube. Most of those people are two-dimensional thinkers. Most of them are people who are really not capable of loving anyone. And they really just want attention for themselves because they still feel an enormous amount of vitriol for their own relationship failures. At the end of the day, brothers, we have to operate on a higher level. Don't get it twisted. I understand that the so-called black woman for the most part is liberal. And the liberal black female is basically like a real life zombie. She's a person who has decided to absorb or take in a lot of self-defeating and self-destructive ideologies. They permeate her. They permeate the so-called black community. One of the main ideologies that the liberal black female has embraced is feminism. As a matter of fact, that is her main altar. As I've been explaining to so many of you brothers that frequent my channel almost since the inception of my channel, the three main altars of the modern liberal female, but particularly the so-called liberal black female, because my channel is geared towards the so-called black man, is that number one, she's a globalist, meaning she loves everyone, or at least alleges to. She wants to hold hands with everyone. The so-called liberal black female is always claiming to have knowledge of various movements and revolutions and things of that nature because she loves to appear cultured and to have an understanding of what's going on all across the world, when oftentimes she does not even grasp what's going on in her own life. The second altar of the liberal black female is the racialist altar, meaning what? She loves to talk about race issues. Oftentimes she'll depict herself as being quote unquote pro-black, when in reality, the racialist altar is normally just used to garner attention for herself and to take attention away from the so-called black man, who's the true target of most racism in this society and in any society where we have that racism dynamic. Why is that? Because the man is the threat. The woman is not the threat. The woman will never be the threat. In all reality, the woman is viewed as being a part of the spoil. When I say spoil, I mean the riches. When you conquer a country, when you conquer a nation, you kill the men and you take the women as spoil, as concubines, sex slaves, whatever you want to call them. So the black woman will never be a threat, ever. As a matter of fact, the only time that she's viewed as a threat is when she shows loyalty and fidelity to the so-called black man. Then that becomes a problem. And the third altar, which is by far her strongest altar, is the feminist altar, which is where she gets to venerate herself as the mother goddess. This is where we get the ideology that currently is making its way through the so-called black community, especially the woke contingent of the so-called black community, of the black woman being quote unquote God. For those of you brothers who remember, back in the 80s and early 90s, that's when they started calling the so-called black woman a queen. Then it was she's a goddess. Now it's she's a god. For the most part, that philosophy is initiated and propagated by fatherless Negroes. It's normally so-called black men with no father that want to push that ideology about the so-called black woman being God. The so-called black woman is beautiful. All women, for the most part, are beautiful when they're in their right mind, but particularly the so-called black woman, when she's in her right mind, is beautiful. But most of them are not in their right mind. And that's the reason why the so-called black man has to get himself together so that he can correct his woman. And if we have that mentality, that mindset, you watch the trickle-down effect. What the so-called black man is being convinced of is that he has to be a social activist. He has to grab up bullhorns and stand on top of cars and call attention to himself and talk about the system. No, the greatest way that you could rebel against a quote unquote oppressive system is to take control over your household. And if every so-called black man does that or did that, and then on top of that, embrace a culture based in a code of ethics that would be productive as opposed to destructive, then there's nothing that could stop us. But the first thing that the so-called black man has to do is correct himself. We have to correct ourselves. But we do have to understand the so-called black woman and how she's been programmed. Because to be quite frank with you, most of them are not going to make it. They're too far gone. It's like a virus that has permeated every aspect of their DNA, every organelle in their DNA structure has been plagued by this disease known as feminism, i.e. Luciferianism, i.e. mother goddess worship. Very difficult for them. Very, very difficult for them to overcome that level of programming. But just getting back to the topic at hand. This sister here, Shahrazad Ali, is a very potent speaker because you're pretty much getting it from the gift horse's mouth. You're getting it straight from the source because she is a so-called black woman. So supposedly she understands the issue better than anyone else. But if you're a man of wisdom, you represent the pinnacle of understanding. And I can't stress that to brothers enough. When you ascend to the pinnacle of wisdom or you're near there, you're going to understand the so-called black woman better than she understands herself. You have to, because you have to heal her. That's the main reason why they push that black woman is God stuff, because they know the so-called black woman is not going to be involved in healing the so-called black man spiritually. He has to heal himself and then assist her in healing herself. And that's the bottom line of it. But anyway, let's let the sister speak. And of course, I'm going to chime in.
My position is that the black woman's disrespect and rebellion against the leadership and the authority of the black man is a direct cause of the breakdown in our black family structure.
Damn. She ain't playing no games, is she? She started off with fire. Start off with straight fire. But once again, brothers, has the so-called black woman rejected the image of the so-called black man as a leader? Absolutely, they have. You see it everywhere. You see it in the household. You see it in the workplace. The so-called black woman has no respect and no regard for the so-called black man. And once again, that's how you know that when she tries to take on her racialist altar, that's a big act. That's a front. That's not real. Because if she truly cared about the so-called black man as much as she claimed she does, she'd show it more in the household with her significant other. That's why I always state, when these liberal black females, so-called pro-black females, come onto the internet and talk about how much they love their black men, well, that's not what it's about. It's about, do you love your black man? That's what you have to focus on. That's what you have to concentrate on. But if the so-called black man wants to regain the respect of the so-called black woman, what we have to do is to show a far greater deal of discernment and discipline. We have to learn how to say no to things. We have to learn how to turn down things that are not going to be beneficial, that are not going to be constructive. Anything that can be destructive or obstructive, we have to remove from our zone, from our circle. We have to remove it expeditiously. And it's going to happen very, very slowly, but it will happen because it's already been written.
Now, of course, there are many black people who consider those fighting words because as black women, we have never been subject to the kind of examination that our men have been subject to since we have been here.
I say that all the time. And this is why even on my channel, when I speak about the liberal black female, the percentage of liberal black females that get upset about what I say is far higher than when I say certain things about the so-called black man. Now, of course, I get many brothers that come on my channel and get upset, especially when I get on the so-called pro-blacks. But for the most part, the so-called black man gets angriest at me when I talk about his favorite sports star or weed. Those are the two biggest idols of the so-called black man. That's very obvious. His favorite sports idol and weed, at least from what I see on my channel. when it comes to many liberal black women, they get very upset about any form of criticism of the so-called black woman, and they try to make the conversation descend into gender war. Once again, I cannot say this enough times. I don't engage in back and forth with women, particularly not in an argument. I'm a firm believer that if you're a man going back and forth with a woman, you better be getting two things from her: food and vagina. If you're not getting those two things from a woman, you're wasting your damn time arguing with her. And those are two great things. Vagina and food are both great things. But you really shouldn't even be arguing with a woman, even when you're getting those things from her. You're going to have disagreements. But all these ferocious, vitriolic exchanges and verbal volleys of insults, so on and so forth, no. You don't need to be doing that, so-called black man.
Have been somewhat protected and shielded from any kind of critiquing about our personal behavior, whereas our men have always been up for examination. The book is not an attack on black women. I have never said that all black women do everything that I list in my book. None of us have lived long enough to do everything that I list in the book. But most...
Well, shit, to be quite frank with you, I've read your book, sister. And I do believe that the vast majority of these liberal black females have done damn near everything in your book. Because they have a lot of time to do a lot of shit. You ever notice that, brothers? You ever notice how much time some of these liberal females have? It's like, damn, what do you do all day? You never seem to have so much damn time. Like they say, an idle mind is the devil's toolbox, right? But just in regards to many of the things that the sister touched on in her book, the reason why the book resonated with so many so-called black men at that time is because they read it and it was like, wow, I'm not crazy. This sister here is actually speaking to me. She's speaking to what I experienced. And that's why I made this channel, and I always state that it's geared towards the so-called black man. Because I know that there's almost no one that is making videos or that is trying to market information to the so-called black man. Everything is about being pro-blackity black. And the pro-blackity blacks are very, very confused, man. They just are. They have no respect for order. Once again, my channel is a pro-truth channel geared towards the so-called black man. And this is what brothers need, in my view, in regards to their mentality. We have to embrace the truth. We have to embrace an understanding of what's going to be the most beneficial for us. Not the victimization mentality, not the gender war, not the circular racial talk. That's another thing. Too many of you pro-blackity blacks, you love going back and forth with the white man on the internet, trading low-level insults, when you should be trying to build up your own level of understanding and not worrying about their views about you. Who cares about their views about you?
Most of us do some of the things that I have listed in my book. And I do say that it is not because of generalizations that we are all victimized by some of the negative patterns of behavior in the book, but the book just represents our collective contribution. This is some of everything that we have done or that we do daily that contributes to the breakup of our relationship, the destruction of our man, and the failure of our children to be able to function.
Let me say this before the sister continues. It's very important to understand that, unfortunately, for so many liberal black females and liberal females in general, they have a detachment from being able to comprehend what they do to bring about the destruction of their life. That's why you have so many older women today in their early to mid 40s who will openly talk about how they had a good man when they were in their late teens or early 20s. But they were told by their friends at the time or their female family members to let him go because he's too boring, he's too lame, or you have to go out there and you have to sample different things. You have to try out new things because why settle for him? These are things that the so-called black woman has been trained to embrace in regards to her mentality. And then that's really just a supplementary program from the root program, which is her being an agent of chaos. Remember, the woman by nature is an agent of chaos. That is why Satan came to the woman in the garden. Satan didn't go to Adam, he went to Eve. Because you pollute the man through the woman. Because when you have the woman set up as an idol, like Adam did, You want to appease her. You want to make her happy at all times. So if you're Satan, you work through the woman, because if the man venerates the woman, he's going to do what the woman wants. So all you have to do is seduce the woman. You seduce the woman, and then you get the man right away. Okay, that's how that works, brothers. And that's why the chain of command on the Luciferian end is going to have woman over man, or woman equal to man, quote unquote. On the right hand side, it's always going to be the man is the head. Because when the man is thinking properly and his spirit is well calibrated, he's going to know how to keep things in a proper perspective. You love your woman, but you don't fall in love with the woman. In love with the woman is idolatry. Like Adam was in love with the woman. That's why he fell.
Not tell us that all of that being my own person and I'm independent would lead to separation, loneliness, celibacy, and lesbianism. They didn't tell us that if you give...
Now, did you hear what the sister just stated? Keep in mind, these lectures that she was giving were taking place back in the early 90s. We're now in 2018. We're about 25 plus years from when this sister was going all across the United States giving these lectures. And things are even worse now than they were back then. Because back then, the so-called black community was not encouraged to become homosexuals and lesbians and embracing transgenderism. They were not encouraged to do that back then. Now, our people are encouraged to do those things.
To us do some of the things that I have listed in my book. And I do say that it is not because of generalizations that we are all victimized by some of the negative patterns of behavior in the book, but the book just represents our collective contribution. This is some of everything that we have done, or that we do daily, that contributes to the breakup of our relationship, the destruction of our man, and the failure of our children to be able to function. They did.
Let me say this before the sister continues. It's very important to understand that, unfortunately, for so many liberal black females and liberal females in general, they have a detachment from being able to comprehend what they do to bring about the destruction of their life. That's why you have so many older women today in their early to mid 40s who will openly talk about how they had a good man when they were in their late teens or early 20s. But they were told by their friends at the time or their female family members to let him go because he's too boring, he's too lame, or you have to go out there and you have to sample different things. You have to try out new things, because why settle for him? These are things that the so-called black woman has been trained to embrace in regards to her mentality. And then that's really just a supplementary program from the root program, which is her being an agent of chaos. Remember, the woman by nature is an agent of chaos. That is why Satan came to the woman in the garden. Satan didn't go to Adam, he went to Eve. Because you pollute the man through the woman, because when you have the woman set up as an idol, like Adam did, you want to appease her. You want to make her happy at all times. So if you're Satan, you work through the woman, because if the man venerates the woman, he's going to do what the woman wants. So all you have to do is seduce the woman. You seduce the woman, and then you get the man right away. Okay, that's how that works, brothers. And that's why the chain of command on the Luciferian end is going to have woman over man, or woman equal to man, quote unquote. On the right hand side, it's always going to be the man is the head. Because when the man is thinking properly and his spirit is well calibrated, he's going to know how to keep things in a proper perspective. You love your woman, but you don't fall in love with the woman. In love with the woman is idolatry. Like Adam was in love with the woman. That's why he fell.
Not tell us that all of that being my own person and I'm independent would lead to separation, loneliness, celibacy, and lesbianism. They didn't tell us that if you give...
Now, did you hear what the sister just stated? Keep in mind, these lectures that she was giving were taking place back in the early 90s. We're now in 2018. We're about 25 plus years from when this sister was going all across the United States giving these lectures. And things are even worse now than they were back then. Because back then, the so-called black community was not encouraged to become homosexuals and lesbians and embracing transgenderism. They were not encouraged to do that back then. now our people are encouraged to do those things. And it's very, very unfortunate. But once again, because the woman by nature is an agent of chaos, and because she enjoys embracing ideologies that are different from the norm, they get bored very easily. That's why they're so prone and susceptible to accepting Luciferianism, which is just anarchy. Oh, you're right, I should be above the man. I should separate from the man. And let me also say this. One of the main reasons why the so-called black woman was susceptible to feminism is because the so-called black man was taking her for granted. When you're with the woman, there's a way and a manner in which you deal with the woman. You're supposed to love the woman and be ready to die for her, as Christ did the church. That's scriptural. You have to be ready to protect the woman. She has to know that she can count on you. When the woman doesn't believe that she can count on you, remember, the woman is very much akin to a child. When a child sees that they cannot count on their parent, that fractures their overall mentality. It's the same thing with the woman. The woman has to know that she can count on you. That's why I always tell brothers, don't try to initiate a real relationship, anything of substance with the woman, if you don't have a steady income, if you don't have a place to stay. All you're doing is adding to the notion that the so-called black man is not a real man.
Up the man, you're going to take one of these things and it's worse and it will destroy your nation. They didn't give us that information. They made us think that it was some kind of glorified position to brag about the fact that I got my own job, my own credit card, my own car, so I don't need no man. I don't even know how we got that mixed up. Ain't none of that got nothing to do with being with no man.
Well, sister, the reason why the so-called black woman got that mixed up, as you state, is because, unfortunately, and this is something that maybe even the sister missed out on, or it was above her level of comprehension. When the woman sees the man, what she associates with manhood is not just masculinity, it's also what he's bringing to the table. What the man represents. He represents protection, he represents housing, he represents food, all those things. When the woman was empowered, brought into the workforce, and told that she can drive wherever she wants, she does not have to answer to a man. Now the man was no longer a necessity. And when someone or something is no longer a necessity, then a person's outlook on them completely changes. The way that you conduct yourself with someone that you want is totally different from how you conduct yourself with someone that you need. And when the black woman was empowered in the late 60s, she no longer needed the so-called black man. And with the black man being the most disenfranchised man on the planet Earth, the most deculturalized man on the planet Earth, of course, the relationship structure between the so-called black man and black woman was going to be worse than any other so-called race. So that's what this sister is missing out on in her evaluation, with her inability to understand why, when the black woman was promised these things, a job and a house and all these other things, why they also understood that it had to come at the cost of having a man, and they were willing to buy into that. And they still are today. They still are to this day.
Yeah, we have some serious relationship problems that nobody has been able to address us on because everybody wants to pretend that this is not going on. You know, over 60% of our women are single, widows, separated, or divorced. They don't.
Well, shit, it was 60% back then. It's about 85% today. And that might be a low estimate. About 85% of these liberal black women are single. And about 95 to 98% of all black women are liberal. Okay? So they're in dire straits in regards to being with a man and being able to maintain a relationship. In America and in the Western societies in general, but especially in America, about 60% of all women in America are single today because they can't maintain a man. They're too busy trying to confront a man at all times and have this relationship dynamic of constant antipathy where the man always has to be on his toes. He has to, quote unquote, worry about when the woman's going to be upset or angry about something. And I tell cats this all the time. When you get to that level where you have to start worrying about when the woman's going to be upset, it's almost time for her to go. Okay? It's almost time for her to go. Your life is supposed to be relaxed. That's why the average age that the so-called black man drops dead at is about 55, 56 years old. Because he's raised to believe that he should tolerate bullshit. No, you're not. When the woman shows that she does not want to fly right, send her on her way. Have a wonderful day. Good luck with you in all your future endeavors. God bless.
Don't have a man. I just came out of Florida and they got a housing complex that the Urban League built, which is a black organization that is for women.
Well, let me say this. The Urban League is not really a quote-unquote black organization. What the Urban League is a Luciferian organization based in socialism. Okay? That's what the Urban League is. It's based in socialism. By extension, Marxism. Urban League is another Trojan horse mechanism that was used to empower the so-called black woman by disempowering the so-called black man. Okay? The Urban League is based in Luciferianism, like all those other civil rights groups that sprung up in the early 1900s, so on and so forth. You'll always see them associated. When you look up most of the chairmen of the Urban League, they were all members of the Divine Nine. And as a matter of fact, the original founder of the Urban League was a black man and a white woman. And then just about every so-called black man that was chairman of the Urban League was a member of one of the Divine Nine fraternities. Let me rewind this back a little bit in regards to what she's saying.
Children only. They say they don't allow any men in there. They say they don't allow that the Urban League built, which is a black organization that is for women and children only. They say they don't allow any men in there. I didn't have time to deal with it, but I talked about them real bad. That's the silliest program I've ever heard of. You know?
No, that's not a silly program, sister. Actually, it's purposeful. That's why they have it configured in that way. The only way that they want the so-called black woman to be able to reap the benefits of their socialist measures is to make sure that they have the man out of the home. Why is that? Because they're trying to socially engineer every household to look at the woman as the head. Why is that? Because they know that they have the woman firmly under control, because the woman is easier to seduce into Luciferianism than the man. You remove the man and empower the woman, and therefore you can take over the entire family, because now you can raise the little boys to be more feminine.
Women that have men, if they got a bunch of children, they need fathers. They need protection. We hear about the drug problem that we have in our projects across the country. It's one of the major places that we have a drug problem. You know, we talk about the great strength that we have as black women. Well, the welfare department don't rent government apartments to single black men. Those apartments belong to black women.
In other words, what is the sister saying? It's easy to talk about how strong you are when you know that the white man has your back. And I say that all the time. The only reason why so many of these liberal black women run all across the internet trying to clickety-clack and argue with you and trying to compare the percentage of black women that graduate from college with black men, all this dumb shit, all this gender war shit, is because they know that if and when the shit hits the fan, the liberal Caucasian has their back. Now, the liberal Caucasian also has the back of the liberal black man, but why is that? The liberal Caucasian knows that the liberal black man puts the black woman above him. That's the hierarchy. On the liberal side, the so-called black man's at the very, very bottom. On the conservative side, he basically doesn't exist. Okay? That's why I tell a lot of silly liberal or woke blacks to come on my channel who get upset when I use that term liberal. Oh, well, why are you conservative? I never said that I was conservative. I don't define myself by those terms. The reason why I address the liberal so-called black is because that is the idea system that's embraced by most of our people, is to be super liberal, to go along with so-called progressive beliefs, i.e. homosexual empowerment, transgenderism, female over male, child over adult, so on and so forth. As above, so below.
Are allowing this to go on in their home. We have not looked at what part of the responsibility do we share. Yes, black men sell a lot of drugs, and a lot of us black women get the money from them drugs and buy some of these fancy clothes we wear.
Yes, and beyond that, one of the main reasons why weak-minded so-called black men start to embrace criminality is because they understand that oftentimes attracts women. That's why I always state that when you put the woman on a pedestal, when you idolize the woman, that leads to your destruction. When a man is on point and in his right frame of mind, he may come off weird to the average young female, or boring, quote unquote, to the average young female. But when they get older and they finally start to mature, they look back and they say, wow, that was the person that I should have chosen. That's who I should have been with. Not the dude going back and forth to jail. But that's all based on establishing the hierarchy of the woman as the head, because the woman is satiated by material items. You have many females running these households who don't mind that their sons are selling drugs because he's bringing money into the establishment. That's why, once again, I keep revisiting this so-called black man. Do not impregnate random women. Make sure that you know who you're impregnating and why you're impregnating them. It's the bottom line. Because when you just skeet up in any little silly broad out here, that starts a ripple effect. That starts a domino effect that's going to affect your child, your grandchild, so on and so forth.
In some of these fancy cars. He is not doing these things alone and without support from us, whether they are good or bad. See, we have a lot of power. We are very strong women. I'm saying that we're using our strength in the wrong direction.
I completely agree. Women, period, and the so-called black woman in particular, are very strong when they're in their right mind. The woman has a beauty and a strength that cannot be competed with, cannot be eclipsed when they embrace what their strength is, when they embrace what their light is, and they stop worrying about the strength of the man. The strength of the man is to bring order and structure. The strength of the woman is to bring nurturing and to act as a helpmeet, a stay, a pillar for the man, someone that he can lean on in times of travail. For those of you brothers who've been caught up in a jam in your life, you know that your mother has always been the strongest person, because that's how they're programmed. The Most High programs the woman in that way when they're functional, to be extremely strong when you need them to be, when you go through moments of adversity or travail. That's the beauty and the strength of the woman. Unfortunately, both the woman and the man have been trained to compete against one another. And that takes away from the beauty that they have.
Using it to tear our man down, tear our nation down instead of building it up. Having an education and a job does not necessarily mean you have a successful life. I keep telling black women that to raise a child, they say, well, I provided with food, clothing, and shelter. That's not raising a child, that's maintaining one.
Well, hey, let me say this, sister. A lot of these modern day, quote unquote, liberated women, liberated black women, they view that raising a child is just based off of how big a check they're getting. That's why you have that scam known as child support. Once again, child support has really nullified the importance of fatherhood. Like when you hear these women say, this man has to, quote unquote, raise his child. What they're talking about is a check. And even if they're not just talking about a check, when they talk about a man, quote unquote, raising his child, they mean under their supervision. That's what they're talking about. You have to raise this child how I see fit, how I define manhood and fatherhood. Because the modern woman wants to redefine all these terms and make them in a way that's more appealing to her. That's truly what it's all about. But like the sister said, just because a woman has a degree and a job does not mean that she's happy. Anyone who has a conversation with most of these so-called empowered or liberated women knows the vast majority of them are depressed. The vast majority of these modern liberal females have frequented the psychiatrist's couch. They frequented the pharmacy to make sure that they get their fill of antidepressant medication. They're emptying wine bottles every night, things of that nature. They're very depressed because the super feminist mentality is purely hedonistic, is based purely in self-absorption and self-aggrandizement. And you can't get any fulfillment in life by totally embracing the mentality of self-aggrandizement. You just can't be about yourself. You have to have an understanding of others and how to love others and allow them to love you. So feminism has taken away that understanding. That's why so many of these women are so depressed today.
Raise a child, you need a parental coalition of a man and a woman. We have sons who are, by not having a father in the home, they don't know how to respect women. They take on the black feminine female emotionalism. They become bitchy. They're doubtful. They're indecisive. They can't make a decision. They don't know what to do about being a man because we can't.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a major problem amongst many brothers today. They're males. They're not men. As I state, it's like females trapped in a man's body. They want to go back and forth and get emotional all day. Especially if you criticize one of their favorite athletes. Why is that? Because due to the fact that they're trained to think like women, they don't have the ability to evaluate facts. They don't have the ability to view things in proper context. They just get emotional. And they try to utilize a tactic that many women utilize, which is basically to try to hear what you're going to say to see if they can try to use it against you in a very low-level way. And it only makes them look dumber and dumber, as opposed to being able to construct a real argument, a real sentiment based upon empirical data and facts. A lot of cats out here can't do it. I mean, when you look at many of these Luciferian blacks, like you have a lot of atheist blacks, I'll probably be doing a video about them very soon. Somewhere down the line, I'm definitely going to touch on them, maybe even a series. Most of them have been traumatized by something in their life and they're angry at God. There are very few people who seriously don't believe in a higher power. They're just angry at the Most High for some reason. They're upset because he has not allowed them to know him or see him. They're upset because he's taken away one of their loved ones from when they were a child. Or they're upset because they never had a certain loved one from childhood. They never had a dad or a mom. So they're mad at the Most High. So they claim to embrace atheism. But like I said, that's another video for another day. Point being is this is very important for the so-called black man to be a prominent person in the household, not in the child's life, in the household. Because you're creating a paradigm for manhood for the child. And that's why, once again, we go right back to the same theme, having an understanding of who you're impregnating.
Teach them that. We don't have that knowledge. We have daughters who grew up in a home where they don't see any affection, where there's no man there. They go out into the world and try to mate. They don't have no idea how to be no woman to no man, how to function in a house with a man, because they haven't seen it. Most of our children, just like us, get all the information we have about how you be with a mate off television. It's the only
Ding, 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 ding. That's why I use TV shows as a backdrop. Hey, what's coming back on the air? The #1 satire of the modern liberal black woman, that being that show Insecure. That's why I like to use it as a backdrop. Because that person, Issa Rae, who's most likely a pansexual Luciferian and also into Wicca herself, most likely, I think it's going to be brought more and more to the forefront as she's raised in prominence. I have little doubt about that, but I'll be touching on her in another video. She has that show crafted in a way to appeal to modern liberal black females. Why is that? Because her character is extremely dysfunctional. Extremely dysfunctional. And at certain points in the show confesses it. In her mirror confessions, what they call breaking the fourth wall, I believe they call it, where they speak directly to the audience. And there was a segment on that show Insecure, I believe in the first episode of season 2, where she spits a little freestyle and she states, "I'm dead inside." Right? She was depressed. She was dead inside, trying to replace her former flame. And many of these females are still dealing with the after effects of ending the wrong relationship or ending the right relationship in the wrong way, when they should have humbled themselves and stuck it out. And they're learning about how to deal with people and how to engage in relationships through the TV. So this show Insecure is really just meant to be a black version of one of the seminal slut programming shows of the last 25 years, that being the show Sex and the City, which was used to try to glorify scandalous behavior amongst women starting in the late 90s. And it's definitely had a deleterious effect on the mindset of all of these women since then. Because the ability of a woman to be a wife in this society decreases every generation, especially since that show. And they've tried to have copycat versions of that show since then. Remember, The original black version of Sex and the City was that show starring Diana Ross's daughter, Tracee Ellis Ross, Girlfriends. Remember that show? And they had the one black guy on the show who was kind of sexually nebulous. You didn't know what the hell he was. Is he just a feminine acting dude? Is he a homosexual? You didn't know what the hell was going on with him. But a lot of that stuff started in the late 90s and has a trickle-down effect to today with this show Insecure. But yes, as the sister stated, most of these so-called black women are learning how to initiate relationships through TV and through their mothers and older female relatives who themselves are failures in maintaining relationships. So how is a person who's a failure in a certain dynamic going to teach you how to be a success unless they're magnanimous enough and enough of a three-dimensional thinker and caring enough to steer you down the opposite path that they took? And a lot of people are not willing to do that. For the most part, the only time that the woman is willing to steer a younger woman down the opposite path that they took is if their relationship ended poorly and they don't want the woman to fall prey to falling for, quote unquote, falling for what their current man is doing. So they'll try to influence the woman to leave the man. Very rarely will a woman end a relationship with a man, know it was her fault, and then tell a younger woman, don't do what I did. That's a good man. Make sure you work it out. They very rarely will do that. Normally it's their relationship went sour. They see a younger woman going through the same thing and they'll say, girl, don't be like B. You better leave him. Because he ain't right, girl. Remember, misery loves company. That's another reason why we have to have a so-called black man presiding over the home so that he can set a good example for his daughter.
And it shows us anybody being together. Those rules have not worked for us. The white woman's liberation movement, we don't have anything to do with that. We have not been under the control of the black man for over 500 years. So what do we have to get liberated from them from?
Thank you, ma'am. The so-called black woman has tried to convince herself that the so-called black man has been trying to oppress her. So-called black man has not had the power to oppress the so-called black woman for many years. I won't say 500 years, but I would say at least for the last 50 to 55 years. He hasn't had the power to do that. So when these women start ranting and raving about oppression, they're talking about their God, the so-called white man. I did a video a long time ago about the gender wage gap. And in the video, I was able to prove, and it's very easy to prove, that when these women talk about the gender wage gap, they're not talking about all men. They're talking about white men. I promise you, the average so-called black man gets paid less than the average so-called black woman to do the same job. And there are fields all throughout corporate America that are held just for so-called black women and women of other races as well. But jobs like office assistant and executive assistant and secretary and all that other stuff, those are given to women. A lot of so-called black women are allowed to get those jobs. They just get coffee and talk shit all day and get paid $55,000, $60,000 a year. And the so-called black man, they would not allow some big 6'2", 215-pound Negro named Raheem to be there getting coffee, because they'd be scared that he'd be popping all the women. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, once again, the quote-unquote unfair practices in the workplace, it's really just a program to try to get women of all races to aspire to be quote-unquote equal to the white man, which really comes down to trying to promote all women to aspire to be the mate of the so-called white man.
They haven't been our boss. That's the white woman and her man. They're going through that, and that's their business. We don't have any business being in there. They only introduced it to break down the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement started with the black man, the black woman, and the black child standing together, trying to plead for freedom, justice, and equality, and more benefits in the country that they...
Well, that's how the civil rights movement was marketed. The civil rights movement was really meant to be an avenue to promote socialism in America. That's really what it was utilized for. And they transitioned the civil rights movement over to the feminist movement, and then the feminist movement over to the homosexual movement. That was the order.
Had to have bill. They threw the white woman in there with the women's liberation movement and made it a woman against man thing. That created created a big separation between black men and black women because then everybody started going for self.
That was the program the whole time, sis. That's what it was designed to do. The civil rights movement was never, ever meant to be something to just be contained in regards to the framework of quote unquote empowering so-called black people. That was just meant to be an initial offense against the status quo of America. First, we want to break down the racial lines. Then we want to break down the gender lines. Then we want to break down the sexual orientation lines. And before we know it, we follow that white rabbit all the way down the hole to Shangri-La. We're where we want to be. All we have to do is follow Pan through the labyrinth. We get to the center. And now we're finally illuminated. That's all it's ever been about. All throughout the 1900s, it was them trying to break down any form of separation between peoples and mix them because they're trying to reinvigorate the spirit of the Tower of Babel.
Then they bring the welfare system in and tell us in order to feed and clothe and house our children, we have to give up our man. You have to put the man out of the house. When the white farm wife goes to the government for subsidy for the farm, they don't tell her to get rid of the farm, and they keep that family together. But in the black community, they make it a requirement because they want to keep endorsing into the black community that the black man is no good and that he is not deserving of respect. He is not deserving of us letting him give us any protection or instruction, and that we are better than them. The major responsibility.
I'm glad that she ended her statement with that because once again, brothers, I cannot stress this enough. The liberal black woman tries to use the racialist angle to get attention away from you because they know that most of these racial stories are centered around so-called black men. So the reason why they want to lead these protests is so that they can get attention for themselves and so that they can claim that they're so-called pro-blackity black. And that's all it's really about. When you see these women leading these Black Lives Matter rallies and so on and so forth, I say this all the time. Go on the Black Lives Matter website. They tell you what they're about. They could care less about so-called black men. They want to destroy the quote-unquote patriarchy. They want to make sure that they take you out of power, whatever little power you have left.
That the black woman has had on the earth for the trillions of years that we have been here has been one of nutrition and birthing children. Those two things have a great deal to do with the survival of any people, the reproduction of the nation, and feeding them the proper food so that they can live. Those are very important jobs. Those are very powerful positions because it puts us in a position.
Thank you, ma'am. I say this all the time. The most powerful aspect, the most powerful vocation of not just the so-called black woman, but the woman, period, is as wife and mother. That's why so many of these black men are bugged out their mind and depressed because they feel like they can't trust a woman. They can't trust her to do what she's been put on the earth to do. And also the so-called black man feel like he can't do what he's been put on the earth to do. So he's so busy trying to make sure he can engraft himself into the corporate America workforce. He's busy trying to force himself into that corporate America workforce. And it's not really working. But he's been taught by his mother from his childhood that life is all about getting a good job, good job, good job. It's not about having a career or starting your own business. And then you have the fear-mongering programming. Oh, you got to be scared of the cops. You got to be scared of this. You got to be scared of that. And you have to idolize the woman. These are all various levels of programming that the so-called black man is going to have to be able to overcome.
To decide who's going to live or die and how slow they're going to die by what we feed them. We have a very powerful position. That's not a small role that we play. We have just been taught to misrepresent and misuse that power.
And beyond that, the so-called black woman and all women have been trained to believe that their strength is women. There's nothing glorious about it. That you should lust after the power of the man, the glory of the man, the preeminence of the man. And when you decide that you're not going to respect the chain of command, the whole house is going to come tumbling down. It's like if you take out one brick, you pull one brick out of that house. It's going to affect the structure of the entire home.
The people who we have been counting on to give us the truth about how to get along have failed. The white people don't know how to get along. They don't have that information themselves. They don't get along with nobody on earth. So they didn't have no information to impart to us about how we're supposed to get along. They changed their relationship rules at will.
Let me say this very quickly. Every culture has their own version of history. Every culture. The only culture that's not allowed to have their own version of history, their own understanding of history, is the so-called black man here in America. And really the people of color in the Western Hemisphere. They're not allowed to tell their own story. And that's very powerful when you have another race of people telling you your story. That means that they will always have power over you. As the sister stated, the Caucasian is trying to inform so-called black people on how to be at peace with one another. And they're not supposed to have the power to do that. And the reason why they have the power to do that is not only because of the television and the radio, but also because we're so receptive to what they think and what they have to say. We're very receptive to them. We empower them by extolling their school system and talking about the benefits of a quote-unquote good education. You're not being educated there. You're being indoctrinated. So once again, I'm not against going to school or going to college. As a matter of fact, it's a great thing as long as it's affordable. As long as it's affordable. But when you're there to learn what you need to learn and get the hell up out of there. That's it. You're not there to fall knee deep or waist deep into the culture of college or university, which is really just the veneration of Bacchus and Pan and the mother goddess. You get what you need to get from there. You learn what you need to learn and you move on and hopefully start a career and start your own business. That's where the so-called black man's mind should be at.
We have, tons of black children around this country that I hear from who have grown up traumatized by the fact that they were referred to as the outside child. When we were having children like that, they called it illegitimate children. Until the white woman started having them, and now it's single parenting. They changed the rules according to what they're doing. So I've called on our people to change them depending on what we want to do, what our needs are. There's another need that has not been addressed in our community, because nobody would deal with it, and that's one that God did not create three sexes. We only have men and women.
Let me say this really quick. It's very obvious and very easy to tell why so many of her lectures were considered controversial. Because she was touching on issues, and really she was touching on issues that black men had been touching on for a long period of time before her. But by the 80s, the so-called black man was not as respected as the so-called black woman was in regards to her having something to say and it being viewed in a serious way. It's just that there were not that many so-called black women who were willing to get behind the microphone and say something. The mainstream / liberal Caucasians have been trying to prep the so-called black woman to do so, but there were very few who were willing to do so. But during that time period, you had the Al Sharptons, the Jesse Jacksons, the Khalid Muhammads, the Farrakhans, who during that time people were getting tired of. They were getting tired of the image of the quote-unquote angry black man. So this woman right here was quite a spectacle, not only because of her great oratorical skills, but the fact that she was a woman who was speaking, and she was speaking on behalf of men, which is very powerful. Very powerful for a woman to be willing to do that. There are very few females today who are sincerely willing to do that. And I can say that this female here certainly is far more sincere than any of these females today, because most of these women today are nothing but Luciferians. This woman here, of course, she deals with her own demons. The woman is always going to have demons that she's dealing with. I know that a lot of people are going to be upset by that statement, but she herself admits it, that she has demons that she still has to deal with. And she accepts that. And that's what gives her the ability to speak on a myriad of topics with that level of proficiency and expertise, because she's willing to admit that she has demons that she has to deal with because of her programming. So many women today are unwilling to admit or acknowledge that the things that they were taught were wrong, which is why there's such a detachment between so many women today and men, because they know that feminism and these other ideologies, these other ideas are tearing them apart inside. But that pride, man. That's why the Bible tells you that pride goes before destruction. I believe it's Proverbs 16:18. That's why it tells you that. Because that pride is what's going to destroy most of these liberal females. And liberal men also, by the way. Because you're following behind them. You're following behind them and you're going to receive the same judgment as them.
I said that we should reject the sisters who try and act like men and the men who try and act like women. I'm not saying to reject them from among us, but they need to be taught. We don't have to accept that as some kind of normalcy because that's not normal.
I agree. It certainly is not normal by the strictest sense of the term, and also by any elongated sense of that term normal. It's not. It never will be. But this society is trying to normalize it. Why is that? Because it's meant to be in veneration of their gods Pan and Bacchus. Pan was a pederast who was always depicted with an erect phallus and engaging in intercourse with young boys. And Bacchus was shown as a cross-dresser. And Bacchus was always depicted as a drunken cross-dresser, an entity that had both male and female genitalia. So that's the point of them trying to bring together male and female, heterosexual and quote-unquote homosexual. To them, the perfect being is sexless and defies any form of sexual orientation or gender categorization. Why do you think they're promoting people like Lena Waithe and Janelle Monáe? That's why they're pushing those broads so hard, man. Because they know that behind the scenes, both of them venerate Pan, aka the Baphomet.
But because now the white people are practicing that, you know, when we were doing it, we were punks and faggots. Now that they're doing it, now it's an alternative lifestyle. I'm trying to demonstrate how they have set rules that they have forced us to follow that they don't even follow themselves. They change the rules to suit them when they get ready. We can change them to suit us when we get ready, especially
I agree.
if we have what we have now, which is a failing system. It hasn't worked for us. We don't have to be ashamed that it hasn't worked for us.
Well, that's basically it on the sister statements. And that's basically it on volume 2 of Black Woman Explains Liberal Black Women. So peace.